coming up on the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast.
When you start to look at the science on an individual level, it's like, yeah, we have like a mean for where everyone should be, but you also look at individuals and different data points and they're like across a range,
Yeah,
right? So like,
yeah.
I feel good on 2.5 grams per kilogram of protein and like, Brian can get away with 1.9 consistently and feel good, right? And it's like neither of those things are wrong or true. They're just within a range. And sometimes I think people forget that I don't know, science changes and evolves, and we also don't have it all figured out, right? So we just do the best
Right.
we can with what we have, and that's why it's, when we can change our minds and be open to new things, I think it's like it helps everyone.
This week, I interviewed Dr. Marc Morris. Dr. Marc has over 10 years of online nutrition coaching experience, helping over 1,500 clients, and has his doctorate in nutrition. He currently helps nutrition coaches, health coaches, and fitness professionals get more clients and grow their coaching business. We discussed the advantages of signing up for fitness competitions, Marc's training routine with having kids, the importance of NEAT, the Dr. Marc method, and his one tip to get your body back to what it once was. Really enjoyed my interview with Dr. Marc. I know you will too. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the show. All right, welcome to the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast. My name is Brian Gryn, and I have Dr. Marc Morris on. Welcome to the show.
Brian, thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat today and dig into all things nutrition and body comp and all those things, and I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, great to have you on. And maybe let the audience know how you sort of got into nutrition and coaching, and now you obviously help people get certified and things like that. Like what sort of led you down this path?
Yeah, I think I like to think my story is somewhat common in terms of played high school sports, started getting more like competitive in that stuff and realized, hey, there's this whole world of like training for it and getting better. So started getting kind of interested in health and fitness and just lifting weights. And I was always kind of like science minded. I went to undergrad for like chemistry and originally, they put me in that program and I was like, I don't really like this stuff, but I'll kind of stick with it. And through that time was just like hanging out in the weight room and reading everything I could online. At that time, it was like T Nation and bodybuilding.com and like just getting into the authors and what they were up to. So I spent most of my time, even in undergrad, doing that stuff and just being really interested in it. I read everything, consumed everything, and then realized, hey, there's people researching this stuff at the next level, and there's a whole world of nutrition. So went into grad school and got interested in that, and then realized, as I got closer to what I wanted to be doing, I realized I still was kind of far away in terms of, hey, I like working with people and I like helping people apply this stuff. And I saw the huge impact that nutrition and training had on my life. Started, competitive powerlifting and that type of stuff. I've been doing that for 20 years and just realized like, hey, there's this whole world of helping people with your passion and you can get paid for it, which was just like completely new and the most like I don't know, interesting thing to me. So that led me down that path, and I've been doing it ever since. So it's been like 15 years strong now.
Yeah, that's great. And competitive powerlifting, did you do competitions or was this just
Yeah,
yeah. Oh.
I guess I can't get away from the coaching side of things. So I've competed at the international level in like IPF, International Powerlifting Federation, which is like the drug tested international arm of powerlifting, but also like coached at that level, and spent probably more time coaching at that level than competing. But yeah, squat, bench press, and deadlift, and that sport in itself has come so far in terms
Mm.
of. I think when I started it, it was kind of it's still very niche, but it was kind of like underground,
Mm.
kind of a misfit strength sport, and now it's turned into like the athletes are doing it. And I think a lot of that's probably the rise of CrossFit and just popularity around just resistance training and strength sports and competitive stuff. But yeah, no, it's come a long way. But I've been doing that since I was, 18,
Mm.
17 when I realized people deadlift competitively, and I was like, this is the coolest. This is the coolest thing. And then I think it just instead of paying like football at the college level, I was like, hey, people are doing this stuff. Why don't I, like put a lot of my time and energy into that, especially because I was just so into the weight room and getting bigger and getting leaner and just completely enthralled in that process. So I just started taking that seriously and kind of going from there. And that's like probably one of my biggest starts in terms of coaching people was powerlifters and weight class sports, wanting to change a weight class or optimize their body composition in a weight class, and got pretty good at that process.
Yeah, I had a buddy who just did a competition, and I think it's powerlifting in itself is nice, especially for people maybe they're not like playing a sport, but they just want something like to build towards and to work towards and like compete against people that are like the same weight class, maybe even the same age. I think he was
Hmm.
the only one in the weight class and the age. So,
Yeah,
obviously he won, but either way, I think it's more of like, okay, I have personal goals that I want to meet, and it's just something to work towards.
completely. No,
Yeah.
I completely agree. I think that's what I like the most about a lot of these, like especially like even like natural bodybuilding and stuff, and like weightlifting and powerlifting, and like when people go out to these competitions and they see like masters athletes and like 50-year-olds doing
Mhm.
this stuff, they have just a much better idea of like what's realistic and attainable for someone in that in that situation versus you grow up in like conventional fitness and you read these fitness magazines and you see people on covers of them and you're thinking, well, like, is that what I'm shooting for? Is that what's like attainable and that kind of stuff? So it's much more realistic. I always encourage
Yeah.
anyone, it's like, check out some of these local things because number one, you'll get inspired, but you'll get a much better sense of, you know, where you're at comparatively and what, you should kind of be striving towards. So I think never a bad idea to compare yourself against others in a competitive sense or whatever, but it just gives you an idea of what most people should be doing.
Yeah. And so you're just doing a bench press, squat, and a hinge. So like a deadlift, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's like in 3 attempts at each. It goes squat, bench press, then deadlift, and then your total of the best three in each discipline puts together in a total, and that's how they rank who wins is the actual total. So you have specific disciplines and different body types, right? Because I know if just generally, if you're pretty good at bench press, you're not usually
Hmm.
built to deadlift. So you kind of got to find your way in each of them if you want to be, the best.
Yeah, it's a little bit like people that do like, even though maybe it's a bit extreme, is like Ironmans or even
Yeah.
triathlons, right? Like, so you
Hmm.
usually have a strength in one area. Usually people are weaker in swim. That's probably I think why they start with the swim
Uh-huh.
and then go from there.
Right. I think probably the better you get at the bike, probably offsets with your swim and stuff, right? In terms of that. Actually, that's like, I think the triathlon based stuff and endurance based stuff is also starting to take off a little bit in athletic communities, right? People are like getting a little bit more into it. It's, I don't know. I don't feel like it's accessible in the sense of like anyone can start doing it. Like if you have a bike, you can start doing it and that kind of thing. But it's like a barrier to entry. It's like, improve your physical fitness, get better at these things, and people start to get competitive. My wife was in a female focused triathlon over the weekend, and it was just cool to see all the
Mhm.
people that show up and compete and do these things and just push themselves. It's like, to me, it's like, this is
Yeah.
this is what it's all about.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're around like-minded people. And we all know how important that is, especially if you're just getting started. Like, like someone else is doing it who's like older than you. You're like, oh, I can do that.
Exactly. For sure.
Yeah.
It gives you something. And sometimes you're like, I want to be like that person in 10, 15 years. Like, what do I need
Right.
to do? Right. And they've kind of laid the path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say you've learned from just competing about yourself and just about like, I guess, lifting in general?
I think the biggest thing is I think people that get into this stuff and really want to improve have that kind of tendency to be type A control freaks to begin with. Like they really want to optimize everything and that type of stuff. And I think what athletics teaches you in general is that like there's only so much you can control. Like you do your
Mhm.
best to leave no stone unturned and that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, it's just like everyone's in the same playing field for that day. And we just do the best we can with what we have and make it work. And that to me is just as someone that would say like, has perfectionist tendencies and wants to optimize everything and really focuses on that stuff. It's like at the end of the day, there's only so much you can do. And if you just focus on always doing what you can with what you have, it just makes everything a lot easier and more fun and more effective. And you stick with it and kind of learn to embrace, as cliche as it is, the journey of this stuff and the process. And that, makes it just so much more enjoyable. So I think that's in general what like athletics has taught me. I remember some of my first competitions with powerlifting. We'd show up and there'd be like, you know, there'd be like a lady like breastfeeding a child and then she would like go out to deadlift and I was like that's the coolest thing, right? Like
Yeah.
the like if that new mom is going to like show up and just do it and not think about like my hands chalked the right way or that kind of thing,
Right.
like that
Right.
that to me is like that's the most like that's the coolest thing. So I think the biggest thing is, yeah, just like learning you can only control so much and just doing what you can, I think is what probably competition has taught me.
Yeah. Yeah. There's always someone that does something that has like a worse situation. I guess is it more in it is in a more difficult situation than you, I guess.
Mm, totally.
So like you see people and I know you have what do you have two kids or one kid or
Too. Yeah.
two? Yeah. I mean like
Yeah.
I don't have kids yet, but like, if I do have dogs and if I'm like whatever, let's say I get bad night's sleep, it's like wow, people work through this stuff and they get it done and it's like someone's always got something, it may be in a worse situation per se than you and
Yeah,
getting it
exactly.
done.
And you just gotta, I mean, I think that stuff is like you could view that stuff as like something that would, set you back or be negative, but you could also just like change your mindset around like, nope, this is what am I gonna like, what else am I going to do other than make the most of these things? And I think that process is what keeps people on the right track.
Yeah. And what have you changed your mind about, let's say in the 10, 15 years, or you said 15 years you've been in health and wellness? Like what thing or what like, nutrition or fitness, like what have you changed your mind about?
I think with nutrition, I started off, I would say probably in terms of education and accumulating knowledge, I would have been more like, I would say like rules based around like, you know, do this and not that, and, compiling all this knowledge. And it kind of essentially turned into like this laundry list of things that I should do and shouldn't do around it. And I think through that process, like I would get results, but they wouldn't always be like repeatable, or I wouldn't always know the underlying reason why. I just thought it was because like, I followed those rules. Like I know I didn't I stopped eating after 8 p.m. I started like, I focused on eating a certain way, and avoiding, certain foods and stuff and that type of stuff. And I think what I was running from most of the time was like this more like objective component of things, and like I don't know, the science of like, calories and macronutrients and energy expenditure and all that stuff. And I think once I finally got a good grasp of that from a scientific perspective and how to apply it, to individuals and both myself, that's when like things really took off. So I'm less, I'd say that like having that objective side of things has really like propelled me. And I definitely didn't think it was a bit more dogmatic at the beginning in terms of my
Mm.
understanding, of nutrition. With that being said too, I think the longer you stay in this stuff, the more you realize that like, if it works, it works, at the same time. So it's like kind of having this, like, I don't know,
Like a
wisdom around like, yeah, yeah, I mean, if something works for someone, there's reasons why, and their reason doesn't always need to be the quote unquote right reason. So within my own approach and what I teach, it's like, hey, science is super important and it guides this process, but at the end of the day, I'd rather be helpful than be right, and I think that's the
Mm.
biggest thing. So I think that's like the kind of the full circle moment is like, hey, need to get better at these numbers and how that guides the process, because it's super important. It's what's kind of like at a fundamental underlying level, the principles of why we get leaner and why we get stronger, and how nutrition really influences that for the most part. With that being said, I mean, there's things that, may or not be quote unquote true from a scientific perspective, but when people can apply them and it does move them in the right direction, I'm less concerned about being right than I am being helpful, which is like they should do that.
Yeah, so like it sounds like you instead of being so stringent about like certain rules around nutrition and fitness, it's more like you've gotten flexible regarding that and realize that if something's working for someone, that you should just double down on that as opposed to just trying to bring them back to those principles that even though science might say one thing, if it
Yeah.
works for if it works
I
for them.
remember there's a few times like having training partners when I was like 18, 19 in university and first getting into powerlifting. And I remember having one training partner that was like pretty advanced in terms of like very muscular, very strong. He was a kinesiology student, had it figured out, and I was getting really into nutrition at the time. And I remember him after a workout once having a protein shake and eating like it was eating some processed cereal, like just out of like the mini box.
Yeah.
And it was like Fruit Loops or something, like I don't know, just like strange. And I was like, hey, like don't you like you're gonna eat that? Like, I mean, isn't that like the sugar's too processed? He's like, well, I just trained and I do need to eat like a lot of carbs to, fuel what I do on a daily basis. So I don't really believe in that other stuff. And I was like, oh man, that's weird. Okay. But all right. And I remember thinking at the time, it's like, there's more to this from a contextual level. And there's like the stories that kind of guide you. I remember, so like maybe like a meal timing example, right? Like so much of us were like, live and die by the clock of eating every 2 to 3 hours and stoking the metabolic fire. And I remember when fasting started to get more popular in like maybe 2010, 2011, I
Mhm.
remember Shelby Starnes, bodybuilding coach. I remember him posting about something and saying like he didn't eat his first meal until like 11 a.m. and would just drink coffee in the morning. And this is like just massive pro level bodybuilder, like
Mhm.
probably like 250 pounds of like lean body mass, like just like huge dude. And I remember someone in the comments being like on this post being saying something to the effect of, well, aren't you afraid all your muscle is like going to waste away? And I remember just his response being something like, well, what do you think? Like, what do you actually think? Like, what, like, I'm showing you who I am and what I do and what it is and how much muscle I have, and I don't eat that stuff. Like, the proof is kind of in the pudding. So it's like kind of those defining moments around like there's a hierarchy of the stuff that matters most and matters least. So what I've learned is
Mhm.
that like, some of those rules could be helpful for some, but they don't really fit into what is completely necessary. And it's kind of just ordering them and putting them within a system that, you know, you can consistently do and apply and that type of stuff. So that's kind of where I've some of those aha moments around, hey, some of this matters more and more matters less.
Yeah.
And kind of go from there.
It's almost like, you can get caught up. I mean, we talk about meal timing quite a bit, and I used to be like gung ho into fasting, and I've backed off on it a lot,
Hmm.
for myself and even my clients. And
Why was that, you think? Is it more or less just where you're at in terms of development or
well, for me personally, I felt like I wasn't consuming enough,
yeah.
and also just not getting enough protein in, as
Hmm.
well. And I also just felt like I was getting maybe too skinny for myself,
Hmm.
and and so I just wanted to a little bit create more flexibility around eating, and I also having a podcast and interviewing a lot of people. I've had a lot of these pro metabolic individuals. Jay Feldman, I don't know if you're familiar with him, or Georgie Dinkoff or Brad Marshall. And they really get into the science of things, and they talk about, optimizing based on like, creating ATP and energy. And a lot of times if, you're always in restriction mode, you're sort of in this low energy state, like
Hmm.
low power like a low battery mode. And like I know it's gone back and forth. People are like, "Oh, fasting gives me energy," but then you'll hear pro metabolic people say, "Well, yeah, but you're getting it from the wrong source per se, and you should be implementing, the right type of carbohydrates and things like this." And so, but either way, so that sort of got piqued my interest a little bit, and I just
Yeah.
added in a meal. And actually, it's been really good. I've enjoyed it. I mean, I like to eat. I'm
Yeah.
not like a huge eater, but I enjoy it, and so that's
Hmm.
why I've added it in, and I've been able to put on muscle and get my body weight to where I wanted it to be.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
that makes sense. I think the biggest thing is, I don't know what I've learned. Peter Attia said it like, I forget what interview it was all about, but something along the lines of like the difference between efficacy and effectiveness, right? And efficacy is more or less like what we know to be true and how things should work. And then the effectiveness piece is like that multiplied by like, do you actually do it? Can you apply it? And that kind of stuff. So it's like, when you look at fasting in some ways, it's like, it's helpful because you time restricted eating, you do restrict calories, like maybe people within that stuff start to eat like less processed food
Sure.
overall and prioritize protein and that kind of stuff. And like, could you eat enough protein within a narrow window? For sure, but it's harder, right? If you think about like,
Right.
if you delayed all doing all your homework until 9 p.m., like could you get it done? You could without a doubt, but like you also it's probably making it harder for you to do at the same time. So starting to like put all those pieces together and think about like, okay, well, like how can I consistently apply this even if it's true or not kind of thing is the kind of like what really like from a I don't know theoretical perspective and applied perspective I really start to geek out on.
Yeah. And also too, I think, especially because a lot of my clients are aging males,
Yeah.
I know there's some science around like sort of a muting effect as far as muscle protein synthesis when it becomes to aging individuals, meaning they have to almost consume more protein than they think to get sort of that stimulus.
Hmm.
And so now if we have those individuals do fasting, it's like, well, I think the main thing to look at is, well, what is your goal? Is if it's is it to build muscle and avoid sarcopenia, then do we really want to be doing much fasting, which is, fairly catabolic? And
Yeah,
so I think it depends on the individual where they're at and, sort of, their age and their goals.
without a doubt. I think that what's interesting about protein requirements and what's optimal and that kind of stuff too is like when you start to look at the science on an individual level, it's like, yeah, we have like a mean for where everyone should be, but you also look at individuals and different data points and they're like across a range,
Yeah.
right? So like,
Yeah.
my I feel good on 2.5 grams per kilogram of protein. And like, Brian can get away with 1.9 consistently and feel good, right? And it's like neither of those things are wrong or true. They're just within a range. And sometimes I think people forget that, I don't know, science changes and evolves, and we also don't have it all figured out, right? So we just do the best
Right.
we can with what we have. And, that's why, it's, when we can change our minds and be open to new things, I think it's like, it helps everyone.
Yeah. And yeah, I agree. I think we're always learning. And I think there's people on the internet, like, for example, let's just say Dr. Paul Saladino, who was like the big carnivore. I remember reading his book, Carnivore Code.
Hmm.
And, he's sort of gone and changed his mind about this and now is consuming plenty of carbohydrates like fruits and things and honey and maple syrup and probably got a ton of backlash. But, I, to his defense, I give him credit for changing. I mean, he wrote a book and he was this, this meat doctor guy. And now, now
Hmm.
he's sort of changed his tune because he's learned and he's evolved. And also, too, what struck me was interviewing with Jay is, you know, a lot of times we talk about ancestral eating, but is that optimal? Like, oh yeah, our ancestors did it, but that doesn't mean
Hmm.
necessarily it's right, right? Or we're living in a different time now, right? So it's like, yeah, that might have worked, but is that optimal? And
Yeah.
so I thought that was interesting when we talked about that.
Well, yeah, and would they have ate other things if they had access
Right.
to them, right? Would be the biggest thing. I think we're looking at it a narrow lens of like history and what did happen outside of that type of stuff. I think one of the toughest things to kind of tease out at times, especially on an individual level, is like, are you making progress because you're doing something or in spite of it
Mm.
is the biggest thing. Because it generally, especially with things that are like overly restrictive or may not work, it's generally the latter, right? Where it's like you're actually doing well, but in spite of it, and things could be in a much better place. If you were, a bit more flexible and less restrictive or at least similar, right? But you're actually kind of getting in your own way, which is like, I mean, to each their own. But at the same time, like if you don't do things that you believe in, you may not do them to begin with. And that's where this like effectiveness piece comes in, right? This adherence piece, where it's like belief is goes a long way with a lot of people in terms of motivating them and getting them to do the right behaviors.
Yeah. And yeah, like if you're doing something, like, is it sustainable for the long term and can you be consistent with it?
Hmm.
And that goes with working out and it goes, I think, with eating as well, because a lot of people go to extremes one way or the other. And yeah, maybe that'll work for the short term, but then you end up sort of just going the complete opposite way. That could be something that gets into the gym 6 days a week. I have a friend of mine who, he's a bit overweight and I never really pushed him to do much, but he finally started getting into it. And
Yep.
like when I say he got into it, like he got into it, like he
Night and day, right?
night and day. And good for him, but I also, after a while, a few months, I was like, you got it. He's not that young. I mean, he's, in his 40s. I'm like, you also want to focus on recovery and making sure you get enough sleep and things like that, because you can just burn out. And so I see that a lot. And then you see
Mhm.
that with the nutrition end of things, where people just go hardcore one way. Let's just say they just want to eat meat, which, again, this could be effective and it could be a tool, but is that going to be long term and sustainable? And so I think that's just a question you want to ask.
Yeah, I think it's tough, right? I mean, I've been in the business of trying to get people to do the things that they need to do and influence them to do things a certain way. And I think as I teach this stuff, it's kind of like it's more like a head nodding thing where if I can get people doing this first before they see things my way,
Mhm.
it's like, hey, I totally understand why you want to get into the gym 6 days a week. You exercise more. That should, speed this process up. So I understand why you're doing that. But keep in mind that, like, if you go too hard and short-term setbacks turns into something long-term and you can't keep up with it, like you're not going to be able to do any of it at all. So it's like trying to get people to like, you know, see why it's in their best interest to do things a different way and maybe a bit more sustainable way, because like at the end of the day, like that stuff is like no one wants to do that stuff. They do want it to be faster. They'll do really hard things, especially if they feel like it'll give them something that they don't currently have. So it's trying to like present it in a way that they can still get the thing, but just, in a better, more sustainable fashion.
And what about yourself? Like we talk about routines a lot on this podcast. Like what's your routine look like and how has it changed through the years as far as just eating and working out and things like that?
I think the biggest thing being I haven't been competitive in anything from a training perspective for a while. And I think actually, like when we talked about powerlifting, that kind of stuff, I know I run into people like, "Oh, you're still training?" And I'm like, to be completely honest, I've never trained this much. Like I almost lift. I hate to be after we talked about guy lifting 6 days a week, but like I would probably like I do generally lift most days of the week, and there's a recovery day in there and that kind of stuff. But I'm training quite a bit. But timing wise, it used to be like after work, pre-kids. Now I'm like first thing in the morning,
Yeah,
and
just get it done.
yeah, get it done. We have like a pretty sweet home set up, so it's like first thing immediately. I do train fasted just out of like necessity,
Right.
but I kind of like I don't know. I call it wake and shake. I like with I'll be consuming pre-workout within 5 minutes of waking up, which I mean, is it the best thing for me? No, but
Right.
adherence standpoint, I
Sure.
get I get my training in and get it done. So that's probably the biggest shift to like lifestyle wise has been I'm training first thing in the morning and kind of going from there.
What time is
As a
that usually?
like 5:30
Okay.
kind of thing. I think some other big changes, being very pro nutrition. Obviously I, you know, trained and stayed active and stuff, but my life 5 years ago would have been like I'd lift weights at night, and during the day I'd sit down on my computer and just work with 100 plus clients and bang out check-ins, and just I'd be pretty sedentary outside of that. And I think, Canadian winters, and you guys are similar in terms of like the Midwest, like it's tough to get outside in the winter unless you make a concerted effort. And I thought most of my body comp stuff would be controlled by nutrition, which in theory it is, but man, that low activity level really
Mm.
started to add up. So I'd gain, 10, 15 pounds in the winter without really adjusting much food wise. So I definitely have become more like pro neat. I'm moving much
Hmm.
more like walking treadmill, weighted vest stuff
And
that
when
I
you,
felt like,
just so people know, when you said NEAT, so non-exercise activity thermogenesis, correct?
yeah, like
Yeah.
spontaneous, like movement that we
Right.
wouldn't really typically consider exercise, but is helpful. And I think it's helpful for quite a few reasons. I mean, you're burning more glucose, you're burning more energy, you're more active, you're out in nature generally, in most cases, as well as like I'm a big believer in, especially early in the day, you start to make positive decisions towards your health, you're probably more likely to do more of them as the day goes on because you're just more invested and things are kind of going your way. So it's a big momentum builder. And I think for me personally, like as an online coach that was taking care of people's health, it wasn't uncommon for me to like sit down and take 950 steps over the course of the day, especially like in the dead of winter. I was like more or less dead, like outside of the training, right? And not the stuff like I think it really impacted everything. So I'd hang out with super heavy power lifters, and you could see them kind of being like trying to minimize the amount of energy they're burning, and just to, for the goal of getting stronger. And you're kind of influenced by that stuff and thinking, hey, I don't
Right.
need to do it. Right. But then, I mean, it's almost entirely the opposite. It's like this stuff can be, you're in better shape. You're going to be stronger and more capable and recover faster and all that stuff. So I think that definitely has been something that's changed a lot. I'm probably like more active now than I have been in my entire life.
Yeah. I just talked with it's not out yet, but Brooks Coleman, he's sort of an online coach and fairly new, but we talked about NEAT and it's the movement that you do outside of the workout. The workout's just a small tidbit of what that movement should look like. I mean, I go for 3 walks a day with my dogs, so that's a big influence on it. And I rarely sit like, you know,
Hmm.
honestly, yeah, like I'm kneeling right now, if you can tell. So
Yeah. Okay.
you would never know, but I don't
Is
even
that by design?
by design. I have a thick pad. It's like this
Yeah.
big, and I just kneel. It gets my hips out of flexion, and I'm sort of like helps my posture.
Yep.
And so it's just the little things like that. I'm not saying everyone has to kneel next to their desk, but if you could just get up and move every 20, 30 minutes, I think, if you, especially if you're at a sedentary desk job, that can go a long way outside of workouts.
Totally can. Yeah, without a doubt. I think it's like it's one of those things I think I mean, as we ask more of people, it's tough to work it all in, but it's something that I think you just can, design aspects of your life around and that kind of stuff. And I think, as problematic as, like the pandemic was for everyone, I mean, I think there was some things that were helpful in terms of like people are like, hey, maybe I can work from home, not travel as much, utilize that time and energy to do other things. Maybe I can, maybe people are going to be more open to me getting a treadmill desk and like moving during these meetings that are meetings about meetings and like still be beneficial, right? That kind of stuff. So I think that stuff is like pushed things a long way. And I know for me personally, is like I think that'd be in terms of a big change around my own life. I probably didn't realize the importance of that stuff and probably swung too far in that nutrition's going to take care of all of this direction and overlook that stuff. And it's kind of funny how the pendulum kind of swings at times.
Hmm. Yeah. And so, okay, so you work out fasted, and
Yeah.
then what's the rest of the day like?
Then I'm usually by like 6:37 the kids are up, and I guess for the longest time I probably would have delayed my first meal till 9 or 10 just out of necessity. I'd get up and start working and drink coffee and just would feel like good about that and control food for the rest of the day. But now it's like with the kids and eating first thing in the morning, I eat with them, and that part is not only nice but like I think it's helpful for me, especially post workout, and I haven't consumed much after that. Like I probably would say truly fasted. I usually take like some EAAs, or I think even in an effort to just see if it makes any difference, I may even just take like half a scoop of like isolate or something like that with some pre-workout kind of thing in the
Right.
wake and shake trademark approach. But then yeah, eat the first thing right away. And then I don't know, I've played around with that first meal and what that looks like at times. Should it be like a bit more carb heavy, or should I, when available, switch to something that's like going to digest a lot slower and maybe meat based? And haven't found an overall big difference within that. But I would say it was like a religious tracker for 5, 6 years, but I've just am so mindful about it now that I'm pretty on top of things for the most part and don't need to do that as much. But whenever I'm going to take things a bit more seriously, I, do a tune up and focus in on getting a bit more objective about things. And that just comes in phases.
Okay, and then so your workouts first thing, and then usually you have like 3 meals after that.
Yeah, for the most part, I would say workout first thing, then like a breakfast meal. It's like honestly probably closer to 3 squares for them, like for the most part, which wasn't the case, 10 years ago. It'd be probably a bit more frequent, that kind of thing. But it's like 3 square meals with like I would say just a bit more protein at each of them, that type of thing.
Got it. And do you guys normally cook for yourselves and for your kids?
Yep, yep. For the most part, kids are like, oh man, they're definitely interesting around food choices and stuff. Like you could be, I mean, I know a lot about this stuff from both I would say pediatric and also human level around like I'm sorry, adult level around what you should be doing, but it doesn't always rub off on your children. They like noodles and butter, man. And like it's just like
Well,
that's in Parmesan. It's just like that's the thing. That's what works a lot of times. So just simple stuff like that. But I would say like just trying to take what I can from that meal and turn it into my own and make it a bit more adult focused.
and then you wrote a book from Passion the Profit. I see in the background there.
Yeah,
What,
put her up there. Yep.
yeah, when did that book come out?
Within the last, it was the middle of July, so July 18th. So it's been out for about a month at this point and doing really, really well. It's kind of like the culmination of the science of this stuff from a coaching perspective, but we also, I know a lot of books in that space, especially there's not many nutrition coaching books. There's nutrition books, but not many nutrition coaching books. But the ones that there are nutrition coaching are a bit more like education focused. They really overlook the business side of things. So the first thing we do in that book is like, okay, all this stuff is good when you understand it, but like how do you get clients? Like what does that look like? The social media thing, like no one's ever taught you any marketing stuff. They definitely didn't teach me that as a scientist. So I like to like kind of dive into that stuff because there's the science around that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what would you say some of the biggest things are for individuals? Let's say there might be some nutrition coaching individuals listening, like as far as obtaining clients. I'm sure you can go different routes on that, but what are some of the ways that best sort of the highest movers to get clients?
I think regardless of if you're, an in-person coach, in-person trainer, or doing more stuff online, I think the biggest thing is whatever we're doing should start conversations with real people that could see us as the person that can help. And I think a lot of people overlook that stuff, especially in the online space. I think regardless of how you're getting clients, you should probably be doing the fulfillment side of things online just because it's more effective in terms of delivering the communication and that type of stuff. But how you get clients can be like, hey, set up in a supplement shop and, people are kind of raising their hand that they're interested in health and fitness and having conversations around their goals and creating a process around, showing the value of what you do. But the biggest thing is like starting conversations, regardless of what you do, and just highlighting that there's an opportunity to work with you. It's like simple stuff, but most people don't do
Right.
that. They're like, I'm going to start social media, I'm going to educate people and that type of stuff. And in reality, they just get really good at showing people they're a passionate coach about the science of this stuff and never really highlighting that there's an opportunity to work with them. And they're probably avoiding that stuff because they feel like it'll make them look salesy or desperate or whatever that is. And I also meet with most of the coaches are like, I want more clients. And I always, kind of reframe it around, well, if you do want that, like, how is anyone going to know there's an opportunity to work with you? You've never talked about it. So you got
Mhm.
to do more of that.
Yeah. And you have a certification out there as well.
Yeah, the Dr. Mark method was
Cool.
like, as we talked about a little bit earlier, was just I was training my staff to take on, to build up my coaching business, and it turned into a thing where many people were more interested in being. I taught I taught my first university course, like a macronutrients and metabolism course, at 24. I'm an adult educator. I love that stuff, and then it's like my own coaching turned into, hey, we want to learn more from you about how you're applying this stuff, the coaching systems, and then ultimately the business stuff. And it turned into a certification over the last 5 years, and we've taken 400 students through the program. They're putting themselves out there, helping people, making money, and it's probably just the most fulfilling thing to me. I would say actually, without a doubt, the most fulfilling thing because obviously you're an established coach, Brian, but when someone comes in and they're new and they're getting this going and they start to
It's a
have
big endeavor. It's a big
yeah,
endeavor. Yeah.
it is without a doubt, but they also have people that are already in their social circles that look to them as the person that could help them and they're just
Hmm.
not currently doing it, and they don't know about Dr. Mark, right? And it doesn't matter if I got like 10 times bigger, they just wouldn't know that I
Right.
am the person that can help them, but they do know that him is like a, a passionate person that they see that could help them, that kind of stuff. So to me it's like I got to give Tim the tools to be able to do this stuff because it's already all around them. And if we really want people to be healthier and that kind of stuff, like that's the path. So try to put
Yeah.
everything that I do out there in the open so everyone can benefit.
Yeah, that's awesome that you did that. And what is I guess, what's the basis around your nutrition certification, and like what are some of the main principles taught there?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is like from the science perspective, it would be like taking macronutrients and metabolism at almost, I would say, the applied college level and a real focus on, how do we need to get people, how do we teach people to eat so that they can improve their body composition and athletic performance and overall health, like very much in the wheelhouse of a nutrition coach. Because I think a lot of times, when people have health problems, the first thing they've overlooked is the basics around this stuff. So we got to have a fundamental understanding of the science of nutrition. But I think the biggest benefit of what we do is I I have a conversation nearly every day, Brian, with someone eager to start this stuff that has taken a basic nutrition cert that feels like they learned a lot, but they have no idea what to do, like in
Mm.
what's next. Like, how do I coach people? Right. So it's like the applied nature of like, how do we set up a coaching system? How do we assess people? How do we put them on a plan? What do check-ins look like? How do we set expectations in the onboarding process? And what does that look like? And navigating difficult client situations and what does the correspondence look like and all that stuff. Like I have a check-in process that, we teach that takes me 5 minutes to do weekly, and really, focuses on the big movers of what people need to do and effective communication and thinking about, you know, a lot of times like less is more with these people if you have the right structure in place and telling them to get specific on things. So it's like teaching that stuff in an applied way. And we do that through the middle chunk of the cert. And I'm very much as a, I don't know, recovering perfectionist. We like to just throw people in the fire in terms of like, we get this stuff going and like you're taking on test clients, actual people through the program so that, when within 90 days, like you're confident that you can coach others and are ready to, have already started your business essentially.
Yeah. No, that's great because I've gone through a decent amount of certifications and you're seeing a little bit more, but a lot of them will supply you with a lot of information, but it's like, well, what do you do with that? And how do you,
Mm-hmm.
build a client base? And it's not an easy thing. And, nowadays, especially this sort of niche has gotten really popular.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah, for
sure
sure.
you
And
could say, yeah.
I can imagine like with your experience too, going through those certs, like a lot of times the applied stuff or the business stuff is just like a little sliver at the end of a textbook, right? It's kind of
Right.
like an add-on afterthought of like, okay, well, here's what you do. And I don't think it's I don't think it's the educator's fault or the company's fault. It's just because I mean, they teach you the basics and it's usually like self-guided and educational, theoretical versus this applied stuff and that kind of stuff. But that to me is like where people really need to be shown. Like if you really want to do this, that's what you're going to benefit the most from.
And I think you get the most benefit, like you said, is just working with clients, like that
Hmm.
hands-on experience because all the knowledge in the world, I mean, it's all about really, adapting to that client and helping them meet their goals. And, that a lot of that is just being flexible and just, getting that experience of working with different people.
For sure. Like, here's what we know, but now I got to get someone to do it. So, how do I take them through a process where they see it's in their best interest to do it and why we're doing things a certain way and kind of going from there?
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, from passion to profit, I like that.
Yeah.
That's a great title.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. It was fun putting it together and writing it. And I know, I mean, you got a flourishing YouTube channel and stuff. And I know like are a lot of are the videos, both interviews and like standalone videos, educational stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, I do a small like micro podcast once a week where I just sort of
Yeah.
talk about a topic and then an interview like this, long form interview, 45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think the thing is you probably have talked about so much stuff that maybe it's time to put it into written form. That's kind of more or less where
no,
that
yeah.
thing came from. It's like we write probably like, 3, 5,000 words a week around how to apply this stuff for YouTube. And it's just like, hey, all the words are there. Just got to reformat it and put it in a way where, other people like to consume it and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, you're right because everyone consumes their information differently, so whether it's through a newsletter or through YouTube or, watching it or whatever. So what would you say if an individual came to you and they had a client that just wouldn't take action or was having trouble taking action or was sort of in this sort of stale, hitting a plateau, like what would be the best advice to help that client move forward?
I think the biggest thing is what most coaches will do is there's like, well, you're not doing the things I asked you to do. Like, why aren't you doing them? You need to do them. Right. And I think from a behavioral standpoint, like that's not really going to work because doing something for someone else is only going to go so far. Maybe it like works for the first little bit, but then they fall off track or whatever it is. I think the biggest thing is we always have to have that like North Star guiding light thing for the person that's about them and not about us that we can tie into everything that we're doing. So to me, it's like going back to like, hey, go back to the intake process. Remember why they started this stuff. And I think that's going to be at the forefront of, when you present stuff, it's like, hey, it didn't look like it was the best week. You didn't, you didn't track your food. You didn't do this, that type of stuff. Keep in mind, like when we started this process, you said you wanted to lose, 20 pounds this summer because you wanted to, reduce this medication or you had that trip coming up. And it's like, keep in mind, like for you to do that, this is what you're going to need to do. Why don't we break this down a little bit further? It's like, can you agree to doing that because it's going to help you do blank, right? And make it about them. That would be the biggest thing is that like
Mm.
people don't, again, like they don't mind doing hard things if they can remember what's in it for them and kind of going from there. So I think from a psychological perspective, we always got to wrap in that like that's your leverage is what they want. And
Mm.
what they want and what they need can be two different things, but we got to remember what they want.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, sort of going back to the why, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Like
I think the
why they
biggest
here
thing,
in the first place.
I think when we think about, health and fitness, like we kind of most of us grew up in that, like, the thought of like that boot camp style instructor of, like, biggest loser style, like finger
Right.
pointing type thing. And it's like, that doesn't work when the cameras are off and people are living their real lives. Right. And the biggest thing is they got to remember what's in it for them. And I think a lot of times the coaching in general is just reassuring people that they are on the right track. Like, that's like, we don't need to overcomplicate this stuff. Like, I think people are like, well, I'm not doing anything new. I'm not doing anything. The coach is like, I'm not, providing any more value. It's like, if you're keeping them on the right track, you can reassure them that they're on the right track and they're continuing to do the right things. Like, that's 90% of the job.
Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. I always ask this question to most people that come on the show, but if you were going to give one tip to an individual who is maybe looking to get their body back to what it once was 10 to 15 years ago, like what one tip would you give them?
I think I can't. I don't think we can get away from protein consumption. I think that's like I think if you were to eat 30 grams of protein every time you consume food, it would probably take care of like 80% of health concerns. So I think for many people, I would start there.
Yeah. Prioritizing protein at each meal.
Yeah. It's like, it's one of those things where it's just like, from a satiety perspective, from obviously like, muscle building benefits, as well as like muscle wasting and all that stuff, and just what it does for how you start to build meals and that type of stuff. It just like, it really helps correct a lot of things,
Right.
right? If you're thinking like, hey, I got to eat a lean source of protein every time I eat, it's like your meal typically looks a lot different than what it would if it's like something, more processed or, anything along those lines. So it's just like a good, I don't know, guiding principle. I mean, at the end of the day, it still needs to add up to an amount that's, optimal over the course of the day. But if you start there and do that enough, you're in a really good spot.
Yeah. No, I love that. Well, this is great, Mark. Where's the best place for people to find you?
I think the biggest thing is, and I'm sure this will show up on YouTube, is that our YouTube channel right now, if you search out at Dr. Mark Method, the YouTube channel, we're quite active on there. I post a piece of content there, either a short or a long form video every day. But we
Oh,
have
that's
two long
awesome.
form videos that come out every week, and are quite active on that stuff. So I would say the best place to check out that like more polished content is on YouTube. But if you could also find me at MERCW Morris on Instagram, and that's kind of a little more behind the scenes.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think YouTube's a great place to be, and I'm glad that you're like, doubling down on that. This is, I think, just the growth there has been great, especially for myself, and I see with your channel as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, we could geek out on that stuff all the time, but I think the biggest thing being, especially for people getting this stuff started, you don't need a big audience and things take off. And when you title things and create them to be found, they do get found, which is just the coolest thing.
yeah. Well, Mark, I appreciate you coming on. I enjoyed this conversation, so thanks for dropping all the knowledge today.
Yeah. Thanks so much. I appreciate the chat, and hopefully we'll be able to do it again.
Sounds great. Enjoy the day.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast. I understand there are millions of other podcasts out there, and you've chosen to listen to mine, and I appreciate that. Check out the show notes at briangryn.com for everything that was mentioned in this episode. Feel free to subscribe to the podcast and share it with a friend or family member that's looking to get their body back to what it once was. Thanks again, and have a great day.